you can see I mean, they're wrong. They're not awful. They're not bad. They are, you disagree with them. They've made a bad decision, but they are themselves not demons, not trying to destroy the country or something along these lines. They are just taking a different point of view, and they have key fundamental differences.
Today with Elgin Hushbeck Jr., who is author of a number of books, including a fairly long time in Elgin titled Preserving Democracy. But recently he's written a much shorter book, and I'm going to hold it up here. It's the first in our newly started Eudokia Enrichment Library that's designed for, has supplementary texts. It's titled The United States Constitution, A History, and that's pretty much what it is. It tells you up front. So I'm going to discuss this book a little bit with Elgin, and welcome. Let's get right out started. You can't really can't have an interview with an author about a book without asking, why did you write this book?
Well, the primary reason is because you asked me to, but I guess more interesting would be the discussion of why I said yes. And there, it back into my teaching. When I'd be in school, I'd teach, and the students would be making arguments, pro and con, because I taught critical thinking. And a lot of their arguments were devoid of constitutional content. In other words, they actually not only didn't know, they were oftentimes had a wrong perception of the Constitution. You see in a lot of debates going back and forth in our culture and society that if you had a good understanding of the Constitution, or at least the schools of thought of the Constitution, it would take care of a lot of the controversy and acrimony we've seen tossed back and forth. So vain attempt maybe to clear that up. That's why I wrote the book and took your offer.
Okay, well, one of the things that was leading me to it, I'm going to ask you a bit of a follow-up on that, was simply that in public discourse, it almost seems to me that it's constitutional or it's unconstitutional has almost become a code for I like it or I don't like it, rather than actually commenting on the material as it relates to the Constitution as a document.
Yeah, there's two different issues whenever you see something go before the court. There's what is the actual issue at stake, and then what did the court rule and why did it rule it? You could believe, for example, that something was wrong, but the law says otherwise, or vice versa. You could be, and your ruling or a judge's ruling could rule that they liked something or they allowed something which they personally didn't like, but they believe that's what the Constitution said, and therefore that's why they were forced to rule they were. So oftentimes people take that as, do they agree with the issue at hand politically, as opposed to what does the Constitution and the law actually say?
Okay, with that, let's consider who is this written for, and of course, in connection with that, who should read this book?
Well, pretty much anybody who's confused by the political discourse and why there's so much acrimony, because one of the things I lay out is I lay out what the various schools of thought, how they developed historically, and what the underlying principles behind them are. So when we get up to an issue that divides the country today, be it gun control, be it abortion, be it whatever it is, you get a better understanding, or you'll have a better understanding of why the various groups are taking the positions they're taking, because you'll understand the constitutional rationales behind them and how they're making their arguments, and you'll be able to decide which is making a good constitutional argument as opposed to which is making a good political argument.
That's a very interesting distinction between the constitutional and the political argument that goes back to the first. My follow-up to the first question is really a related issue. Which kind of argument are you making? So this book, and again, I'll hold it up, folks. This is talking about what the Constitution says, but not only what the Constitution says, but how over time the Constitution has been and is interpreted. So, what would be your primary goal then? And I believe you've really almost answered this, but I'll let you go ahead and underline a little bit with that in the last question. The goal that you would have in somebody reading the book.
Well, I'd like to see someone who could look at somebody on the other side. You know, they've read the book, they come to a conclusion. They may not change their position at all, but they can look at the other side and say, I can kind of see where they're coming from now, and I don't have to demonize them to disagree with them. I can say that, well, I disagree with the particular principles. I mean, we have two really schools of thought. One is what I call in the book the Federalists, which goes all the way back to the founding fathers and how they viewed the world and how they viewed the Constitution. And then in the 19th century, or 20th century, we end up with the progressives, and the progressives took a vastly different view as to the underlying principles upon which the founding fathers did. I have a large section where I said, this is what the founding fathers believe, this is what the progressives believe. And out of those two schools of thought coming up to the present, they've evolved and changed to where you can now look at one side and you can see, okay, the judge, I disagree with the judge, but at least I understand where they're coming from. I think one of the common misconceptions is the judges are politicians and that the judges are just picking political positions and they're pouring their political positions into their rulings. And I don't think that's true on either side. When you understand the different philosophies and behind them, you can look at a ruling that you don't like and you can say, I disagree with that ruling and I understand why the judge did it and I disagree with their underlying philosophy, but I at least understand why they did it. You don't have to say, oh, well, they're just political and they're just putting their political beliefs into the law.
So you can understand how somebody gets to a view even when you consider that view to be even incredibly wrong.
Yeah. I mean, you can see they're wrong. They're not awful. They're not bad. You disagree with them. They've made a bad decision, but they are themselves not demons, not trying to destroy the country or something along these lines. They are just taking a different point of view, and they have key fundamental differences, which actually make it hard for us to talk to each other because we don't understand the underlying dynamics of why we are reaching the positions we do. Even for our own positions, a lot of people don't understand the philosophy and the principles upon which the founders based their opinions. Say someone agrees with the founders, they may not understand why the founders reached the conclusions they did. And if they understood them, they would reject them and go to the other side. But, at least we would have a discussion over things that are actually important and a matter and are driving people's opinions rather than over, who's the worst, who has the nastiest campaign ads, or who can I slander the most, which really ultimately gets us nowhere.
Okay, it was an interesting there. We've talked about this being aimed at young adults, and 18 is the voting age, so you're basically coming out of high school. And that was the age group that I had in mind for this, although on reading it, I really do think it can extend, to many people who are somewhat older than that. So, but it would make an excellent readings book, for senior high schoolers or early college. And the reason I emphasize all of that, besides trying to sell the book, which is my job, is talk about why is it important for people in general to understand this kind of constitutional reasoning that you're talking about. Most of us aren't going to be politicians. I became a precinct captain the year I registered when I was 18, but most people don't get quite that fast out of the starting gate. What's important for, everyday people, your standard high school student who is about to graduate, somebody like that, why is it important for them to understand this kind of constitutional reasoning?
Well, one of the reasons, the United States is a fairly unique country with our Constitution, and it gives us a particular structure that has worked quite well over the last couple hundred years. Do we want to change that? Is there some tweaking we can do to the Constitution that would make it better, that would make it more responsive to the people? Or are we just making changes, not realizing that we're actually removing supporting beams that will cause the whole system to crumble? We are making changes to the Constitution. We are changing the way our government functions. But what are the ramifications? For example, big controversy these days is the Electoral College. Should we keep the Electoral College, or should we go to a pure democracy where the president is chosen by popular vote? A lot of people would say popular vote, but if you don't understand why the founding fathers set it up the way they did, and you understand the underlying principles and the reason for it, are you really making an intelligent decision? What will happen if we do that? There are certain ramifications, and if we don't talk about it, we're just like, well, I was taught in school democracy was good, so I think everything should be democratic and everything should be by popular vote. Okay. The history of democracy is pretty darn clear. They've all failed before us. So, so do we really say that, Rome lasted for, almost 400 years. So can we really say here we are at 250 that, we've got this down pat, so we know what we're doing if we actually don't know what the founding fathers did?
So you would like, one of the things there that you're thinking of is a solid foundation for when you make the next change. Understand what you have before you try to build.
Exactly. I mean, I'm primarily my day job is I'm an engineer. When I come to a particular problem, I want to understand the system and I want to understand what's going on. And then once I understand it, then I try to tweak it and I try to make it better. But if I just go in and start making changes because I think that sounds pretty good, not knowing what's going to happen, that's actually a prescription for disaster.
I've seen that one happen before in the engineering world, software engineering at least.
Oh yeah.
So let's finish this up with a really open-ended question. Could you select some presumably controversial topic as an example, and show and give us a little bit of a look at how the constitutional reasoning impacts, the way you would respond to it and the way you would discuss it?
Well, the most obvious example is the moment is the recent Dobbs decision out of the Supreme Court, and the previous Roe and Casey's decisions before that. Those actually I write about them in my book, including Dobbs, and they are actually very illustrative of the difference between the way the two groups view the Constitution. Do we have a Constitution that is written down and to be understood as the founders intended it, or that's the founders' view, or our Federalist view, or do we have a living Constitution, a Constitution that grows and develops, which is what what the progressives wanted, and what we have now today with the two courts? It's not so much politics that divides the left and the right on the court. It's these views of the Constitution and where they come from. And Roe, very, very typical, very grounded in the living constitutional view. There's nothing in the Constitution that talks about abortion, but the judges at the time felt that was something that that should be part of our understanding, and the constitutional, as it lives and grows and develops, that becomes constitutional. Whereas the Federalists are going, no, we have what's called dual sovereignty, which quite frankly, a lot of people don't understand dual sovereignty. But in a nutshell, it's a sense that we have the federal government that handles federal issues, and then we have the local and state governments that handle everything else. Both are sovereign within in their realm. It's why we, for example, we don't have a federal law on murder unless it's of a federal official, because murder is something handled by the local state communities. Um, that dual sovereignty used to have abortion was controlled by the states and the local communities, whereas the living constitutional view would have that it grew and became part of the federal responsibilities and therefore a right that needed to be protected. It's those different views. If you know where somebody believes in terms of are they a living constitutional person or are they a federalist, you know where they're going to come out on the at least on the legal reasoning of Dobbs, Roe, and Casey. Now, a distinction that needs to be made is there's a difference between the legal reasoning and your political reasoning. There are people who hold a particular view of abortion, but hold the opposite view when it comes to the court's rulings. So they may think that abortion is legal, but think it should be the Dobbs, for example, the Dobbs decision was correct. And there's people of the opposite, who think it should be illegal, but who believe that the Roe decision was correct. So there's various views, and again, one of the things I do in the book is I try to be nonpartisan about this, and I go back and I just look at the origins, and I lay out, okay, what did the progressives believe, and why did they disagree with the founders, and what did the founders believe, and the worldview that they came out of, and how do these different worldviews end up reflecting modern day politics? And that is, getting that understanding really can help you sort of filter through the political disputes we see on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, I think that'll probably tell people a lot what the book is about. This is really not a massively lengthy book. I'm going to put a link and a QR code for it. But, the last page of print is just page 86 in this. And so I think it's a well worthwhile investment in learning how to understand these arguments better and perhaps have a more effective debate on important issues in this country. So thanks, Elgin, both for writing
Thank you.
and for being with me today.